ropes you in with 2 left jabs, and then before you know it, you get a sucker punch, which I thought the video was a sucker punch. You're a white guy. Tell this white guy that white people aren't being killed.
Musk was notably silent, whereas Mr. Rupert made a contribution.
The GNU was then configured to elect a president. It wasn't configured around. It may claim it was a statement of intent, but it hasn't achieved that. Load shedding is we'll vote next year. I think load shedding is 18 years old.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. Before we get started, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor for today's episode, Pace Car Rental. Use the promo code SMWX to get 10% off your next car rental. Now, let's get into this episode with SMWX royalty. Mmusi Maimane is the leader of Build One South Africa. He's the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee in Parliament and my fellow Liverpool fan. Mmusi, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX.
Hey, congratulations. We are champions.
You never walk alone.
This is it. This is the year. We've done it. We've done it.
Yeah.
Done it with style also.
It felt good with the fans in Anfield this time.
Oh, jeez. That, when Liverpool win the league, it registers on the Richter scale. When Man City win the league, hardly anyone knows. Girlfriends and wives are the ones celebrating.
It's just a little tremor.
It's just, no one,
This is a shame.
This just tells you how significant this win is.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, poor Man United fans, let's spare thought for them in these difficult times.
Those ones, they're going to keep getting hammered. Now they're 16th. Next year they're trying to play to not be relegated.
Man United's fate is similar to the ANC. Great in the 90s, and then here we are.
In loving memory. Could never be a more greater title.
Exactly. But obviously, Man United fans should still vote for BOSA. It's just,
Listen, guys, if you want to
feel victory.
If you want to feel like you're going forward, work it out. Vote BOSA.
No, it's good times.
It's
good times. And I mean, we speak at a fascinating conjuncture of both foreign policy and domestic policy. I mean, can someone hit the lights? I've got something to show you. How do you react to that meeting, that press briefing in the White House?
I mean, firstly, I'm a big fan of your work and love the podcast. It is my favorite podcast. And
Thank you.
Certainly privileged to have watched the journey and its great success. And I think it's phenomenal. And I think the reason I think it's important to start there is because one of the things I've appreciated is that you've never let any politician arrive here and get away with talking rubbish. And I think the reason why that's important is because it allows people to constantly be honest. And what I witnessed at the White House is that I'm not sure that robustness and those theatrics and that sort of disregard for protocol or anything is something that we've had other than some moments in Parliament when they were there. And I think it shook everyone. But I really think that we didn't put our best foot forward. And it's not whether you like the president or not, or you think.
Sure.
It's just that if you were sitting anywhere in the world watching that, you would have to say to yourself, okay, so these guys don't have an ambassador there. Their special envoy is not there. They're telling us that it's not, at least some of the lines that came out of it is that they have a murder problem and it's not just unique to one race, it's for everybody. And therefore the message is that, is South Africa investable on the basis of just that interaction? I don't think you could walk away and think so.
Absolutely.
And therefore, it begs the absolute honest question. What is our investment thesis and how can we sell it better rather than going there for vibes?
I fully agree. I think there's a sense, I can understand why people want to paint it as a success, because in some ways, the president wasn't just there as Cyril Ramaphosa. He was there in a way representing all of us. Yeah. You had that feeling like you were watching a sports team and, you wanted them to do well. And so people, I think, have got a bit defensive because the country in some ways was attacked, on the world stage, which I think is right. But when when I look at it in the cold light of day, it felt really haphazard. And it felt to me like there's no way we could have prepared for the video, because that was a complete wild card. But I would have liked a much more robust response to the white genocide myth, to say, Mr. President, this is clearly wrong. As you say, not just like, yes, well, we have terrible problems and we're trying to solve them, but you're actually wrong on this for these reasons, these reasons, these reasons. Respectfully, sir, you're wrong.
I mean, I felt like I had this moment where I was watching this with a group of reporters as we were preparing our heads through it. And so there are a couple of things. The first thing is we allowed ourselves to be dragged into the place necessarily we don't want to be swimming in, because that wasn't the point. The point was we want to talk about investment. We want to talk about collaboration with the US. So, and the hot topics are defense. The hot topics are investment, Goa. So we got shifted off that.
Absolutely.
Which I've done boxing. And when you box, sometimes you walk into the room and it does happen. Someone, ropes you in with 2 left jabs, and then before you know it, you get a sucker punch, which I thought the video was a sucker punch. And so when you get sucker punched like that, you've got to think to yourself, what do I now do? You can't, and the rule in boxing is that to keep your hands up all the time, because that's your... So I just thought yesterday, after we got sucker punched, we dropped our hands and said, keep punching. Whereas what we should have done is ask some poignant questions.
Yeah.
The issue here is about murder. Whether it's murder in farms or whether in townships, that's the issue.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, if someone wants to paint it as genocide, and I'll say it again, the United States needs to go out, open a case at the ICJ, let's have them come and investigate them here, and then we can go from there. Then it's not my word, your word, investigate it. But the second issue is that when you get sucker punched, you better land your own. And I would have genuinely asked the question. So President Trump, if I was sitting during COVID watching protests around Black Lives Matter or George Floyd, I didn't think to myself, oh, okay, so in the US, the police are killing the African Americans. So I'm going to offer African Americans refugee status. Like you wouldn't conclude that. You would have said to them, they've got a problem with gun violence. They've got a problem with prejudice. But the administration is busy dealing with it. And in the same way here in South Africa, we've got a murder rate problem. And I think that's an important moment for us to take note of. I mean, I'm amazed sometimes, and I say this as a Black South African, that when you look at the ratio of how many white South Africans or white farmers are being killed, they've managed to get it into the agenda of the White House. If 75 people are being killed every single day in this country, over 70 of them are Black and the majority of them are Black males, why are we comfortable with that? Why are we not shutting down everything to say, do something about murder? And so in essence, the response in that moment would have been to counterpunch with real facts. This is what's going on in the US. No one thinks that the US is killing its children, regardless of how many school shootings occur. Yet, we've got to counter it at that level, but at another level, at a personal level, is to say, here's our response strategy. Here's what our crime issues is. Here's what we're trying to do. Because there is a question to be put on the table to say, are you going to invest in a country whose murder rate is the way it is? It's, in essence, we're one of the highest. And if you were thinking about the 3 top economies in Africa, and the president was asked this, it's South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt. We're double the amount of murder rate Nigeria is. We're 31 times that of Egypt. So on a global stage, you want to be able to say that we recognize that we've got a murder problem, but here's the fundamental issues that we're doing. We're investing more in policing. We've put specialized units. Here are the things that we're doing. And I thought, instead of us stepping up to lead yesterday and lean into the things we are doing, we allowed the agenda to be set for us, and we ended up responding. And I thought, like a boxer, our hands were down, and so we just kept taking punches. Eventually, even with people in the room who aesthetically, it just did not look good to have that sort of racial dynamic as it was produced. And so you ended up almost with the worst of all worlds. And I think the impact of that is going to be significant for us as a country, as it has been, whether it's be PEPFAR, whether it's be whatever, the bilaterals. But I think just the idea of saying to ourselves, hey, as South Africa, what is our thesis? And if someone moves away from that, how do we look at AfriForum and say, how dare you say things about our country like that? There are misinformation. They have consequences. And this is one of the consequences, because AfriForum need to be compelled to prove genocide in this country.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I feel like there's a sense in which people are celebrating that the delegation didn't get treated like Zelensky, and that is now being presented as a victory. But suddenly it feels to me like the goalposts have shifted, because the way this trip was sold is that success means we are going to at least begin resetting relations with the US. And then suddenly after the meeting, it went from we're going to reset relations to we're going to leave that room with a little bit of dignity intact.
Sure.
And those two things are not the same goal. I mean, when we take a step back from the optics for a second, do you think we are any closer to actually resetting our relationships on trade, on these geopolitical matters with the US?
I don't think so. The only thing that gave me a sense of encouragement was that the pre-meetings that had taken place, the Minister of DTIC, Minister Parks Tau, spoke a little bit about some of the papers that they presented to the US on Monday, and then the feedback on Tuesday. So that gave me a sense upon which what outside of the White House, or at least that particular hour, other work is being done. What I think we need to do, though, and it's coincidental that the White House meeting took place on the same day as we were tabling the budget. And therefore, if you look at the two issues simultaneously, you've got to say to yourself, both of them have similar features in that you've got a budget that's telling you you're not growing at the right rate, you're not investing, your gross capital formation is lower relative to peer countries, you're not investing in fixed infrastructure, your murder rate is up, your education levels are not quite where they should be. So can you budget with the picture of the things you want to achieve so that you fund for that? And yesterday's meeting should have gone in there to say, we have just over $15 billion of exports going into the US. They predominantly on platinum, citrus, and some of our minerals. And therefore, how do we double that as a key objective? And then secondly, our imports to the US, whether it's in motor vehicles, etc., are less than that. So how do we increase imports to the US, even though we know that we have a positive trade balance in our favor when it comes to bilateral trades? So when you know what your goals are, you then play towards that. It was never good enough to do what, as you describe, we'll walk away with our dignity. That's like saying, hey, Pirates are going to go play Real Madrid and the best they can do is walk away with a draw. I mean,
or even just lose 2-0.
Just
But when we walked off the field having lost, we held our heads high.
We held our heads high.
We were calm. We were calm when the goals went in.
Exactly. Whereas we should at least, I remember one of the Orlando Pirates captain saying to the team on the tunnel, and not that I support Pirates, but I do listen to common sense. He said, you must stop being admirers of your opponents and go out onto the field and play to win. And therefore, even in our relations with the US, the story, sure, if the benchmark is Zelensky at the bottom, the Canadian Prime Minister had a different engagement.
Absolutely.
Narendra Modi had a different engagement. And so what were some of the lessons there? And I thought the Canadian Prime Minister came out there, laid out the facts, wasn't intimidated.
Absolutely.
Landed some punches. And so the prep work that should have been done is that don't go into this as an engagement. Go into this as a debate which you are trying to win. Because when it's said and done, there was someone who was sitting in London watching this issue saying, is South Africa an investable destination? There was someone sitting in Japan or elsewhere who's watching all of this. So I maintain that the sooner we get around to articulating the South Africa we want to see, where the opportunities lie in the country, this is the kind of leadership we're going to have, This is the composition of society. The better we have that conversation, we can budget better and do diplomacy better.
Yeah.
But we can't just do diplomacy or budgeting for vibes.
So much I want to pick out of that. One question I'm interested in your reaction to is, how did you feel when the president adverted to John Steenhuisen to try and back him up? Because for me, I mean, it was a very dangerous move, and I don't know how it's going to play out in the future, but to kind of try to bring credibility from someone who is in one way on your team, but in another way, something of a political opponent was an interesting moment.
First and foremost, I think it's, if you have a cabinet and a cabinet minister, it's fine to defer to them on an issue, but I thought it was the wrong issue. Because all it did is that it said, you're a white guy, tell this white guy that white people aren't being killed. Now, it's just...
Oh, man.
What I would have rather said to, because we've got to establish in this country this first principle. That for those of which I would consider myself in part, some of them, who genuinely believe in a multiracial South Africa, in a South Africa for all, non-racial South Africa, who believe that it is possible that black people can represent white people and that white people can represent black people.
Sure.
Those of us who believe that, then we must lean into that and say, if I, as a president who is black, and you ask me a question about my citizens who happen to be white, I must be the first one to defend them. That one I can't defer.
Yeah, sure.
I have a job there. But if you want to understand trade and trade relations as they speak to agriculture, then the Minister of Agriculture is here and he will tell you. And if then the Minister of Agriculture wants to add the fact that white farmers are still wanting to reinvest in South Africa, that's a good thing. So I just thought in that it perpetuated subconsciously the very issue you are trying to steer away from. Because the macro debate we can have in this country is that it is blacks versus whites. Whereas, as evidence shows, the sooner we can get off that conversation, whilst I accept economic inequality, whilst I accept historical legacy, I accept all of that.
Sure.
But the future of this country must be a future where black and white can vote for leadership, they can get behind, so that AfriForum in this country, whilst they may be a cultural group, must still be able to go, that leader is our leader. This country is our country. So for that purpose, I just thought it confirmed what you are trying to speak against. And as for, I also thought it introduced a dynamic of politics that I'm uncertain that a minister in your cabinet, even though I was responding to the question that was on the screen, it puts them in a political space, whereas this was a government delegation. If it was a multi-party meeting, then speak for your party. And I thought John did a great job for speaking for the DA. Except in that instance, he is there as a Minister of Agriculture. And that should be his mandate. Because it would be inappropriate for if Park Stau was asked the question to speak as an ANC person and speak conceivably, as we like to position this thing, black versus white parties, for him to then say, on behalf of black people. I don't think that's helpful. I actually think that the better story that South Africa must sell to the world is that we have a better history of racial division. We have economic inequality that we still have to confront. But actually the future of our country looks a lot more non-racial because that's what we set out to do. And we will have leadership, black and white, that serves a country to which belongs to black and white.
Sure. One last question before we move to the budget in the second half. The two oligarchs were also there. You had Musk and you had Rupert on different sides of the aisle, but funnily enough, both South Africans. What did you make of their presence and their contributions? Musk was notably silent, whereas Mr. Rupert made a contribution. Far be it from me to defend Johann Rupert, but it was one of the positive contributions that actually helped shift away from this idea of white genocide when some of the golfers, shall we say, were below par.
There was certainly no. But I did think what Johann Rupert did, which was the diplomatic thing to do, was not to domesticate violence, was to globalize violence. And I thought his analogy about saying, like you have gangs here that do similar work, we have a similar problem. The debate should not be your side of the boat is worse than us. We should all be quick to condemn global violence. We should all be wanting citizens to live. And if anyone is sitting in a room wanting for anyone to die out of violence anywhere in the world, we should be railing against those people. And I thought Johann Rupert landed that point well. And I think more than anything, having a delegation with him in it, Adrian Gore, I would have liked to see people like Sipho Maseko as the CEO then of Telkom. I would have liked to see a broad range of a business delegation who's saying telecoms in this space, here's what we're trying to do, if that was part of what you were trying to achieve. And so their presence there and equally so that question of Elon Musk, to me, I think, you know, Sizwe, the history of this problem is deeper than just the last few months. I remember I was in Washington in the Africa Foreign Committee, and I was there enthusiastic. I'm from the country of Mandela. Walk in there, you know, you got vibes. You ask the Africa Foreign Committee, hey, what do you make of South Africa?
Yeah.
Say, South Africa, where's that? It's a country of Mandela. You know, the struggle, all of that. They were like, oh, okay. Sure, we know where it is, but your ambassador has not even been to any of these committees to tell us. Okay. So it was clear that it became out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And then when you build on through decades, this was a decade ago, when you build on from there, no diplomatic relations, no sense of formal and more broader engagements diplomatically. Yesterday, for me, it was a serious omission not to have our envoy, a special envoy, in the room.
I mean, amazing that he seems to have fallen out of favor even before he's really started.
So you don't have an envoy, you don't have an ambassador. The hard work should have been done before in being able to say, here are some of the trip points, because we might all sit here and go, it's insane somebody thinks that there's a genocide here.
Yeah.
But if there's someone who genuinely believes that, it may have been helpful to arrive there and say, actually, our crime stats, which have been verified by this agency, tells us these are how many lives were lost. And that's, if the figure is 30 or whatever the figure is, it's 30 lives too many.
Yeah, sure.
But let's get the actual figures themselves, verifiably so that there's an independence in there. So and as for Elon Musk and his whispering into President Trump and the work that's going on there, I think even if they believe that, there's other conflicting evidence to the issue.
Yeah.
Amazon is invested here. Microsoft is invested here. And so, yes, relative to those three countries, as I've mentioned, our foreign direct investment is low. We've got to do better. We've got to do more. And South Africans, wherever they may be, we need to make sure that anyone in the world can feel comfortable to say, how can I invest here? Just by nature of the sophisticated nature of our economy.
Yeah.
And I thought yesterday, so people like Johann Rupert, people like Elon Musk, we should have had more CEOs who are talking about how best they can invest here. And if our laws, our systems don't work, then it's upon us to work harder at making sure we achieve that, because we've got a picture for the future. And so, and Does South Africa then need Elon Musk's investment as a question? I think that the technology that he's talking about may not be sole proprietary his, and so therefore then the question becomes, if we believe we need a Starlink equivalent type of technology that can be deployed in this country, who else in the world can we find that we can have a conversation with?
Could we even start to develop at least adjacent capacities ourselves one day, instead of just constantly importing technologies or without any strategy towards being able to beneficiate in that space ourselves?
Yeah. So to me, if you say to me, what was the grand failure? The grand failure is that we did not put forward our thesis, what our future is, what our investment protocol is.
Yeah.
We did not do that enough. And when you know, when you play football and you play for a glorious team like Liverpool.
For instance,
it's just an example. You are going to arrive and play at Goodison Park and they're going to tackle you hard and it's going to be ugly.
Or Old Trafford.
No, Old Trafford, whatever, it's going to be ugly. But you don't forget that you are there to score goals. And I think yesterday we started to say, but you are being unfair, you've pulled a video, you are kicking us, you are... No, we were there to score goals.
The
Did we score goals?
The ref rubbed us.
You are there to score goals. We should have treated it like a debate, not an engagement.
Yeah,
and we should have gone there to say, a win for us looks like when we've told people, here's how you can invest, here's what we're going to do. Because that sets the narrative in the country.
Yeah.
It tells people that I can get behind Team South Africa on this basis. And I think all of us, myself included, I was the first one, or one of the few who said, I want President Ramaphosa to go succeed there.
Absolutely.
And still do.
Absolutely.
And I certainly think that we weren't well served by the silence of Mr. Lamola, who's the foreign minister, because he's the second most senior in the delegation. And so when there were uncomfortable moments, he should have been the default guy, because to be able to speak into diplomatic ties, foreign policy. But I think the underlying problem, real underlying problem, is that we are unclear about what our objectives are. And when you don't know your what, you don't know what your ultimate destination is and your why, the sacrifices become heavy to pay.
One thing I feel compelled to say, which your reflections remind me of, is part of the reason that I find this white genocide story so objectionable and so wrong is that we as South Africans all have a very direct and traumatic relationship with crime. We have all suffered unimaginable trauma through violent crime. And for that trauma to be taken and weaponized against the country, as if some people's experience of violence is more special than others, is a uniquely evil thing to do, I'm afraid to say. And that just strikes me as such a stain on the way this discourse has unfolded.
And worse than that, or maybe not worse than that, I think your analysis of that is profound. It also gives criminals some mercenary status. The people who are murdering people are not on some cause of a genocide.
Some elaborate political conspiracy.
These are criminals. And therefore, they then don't become the enemy of a particular race. They become the enemy of all South Africans. And so our energy should have been turned there rather than on exactly, if you like, expropriating pain without compensation, or using it in the most brutally evil way, as you've just described. And I can't help, I really do think what needs to come out of this, because I thought one of the painful things about yesterday for me at a personal level was I felt like our country's entrails were being bared out in the world. It's like airing your laundry, and it's not just dirty laundry, it's painful laundry. Because, accept the fact that, as you say, all of us experience a varying and to similar degrees of violence and murder, etc. All of us at least know someone who's been murdered and there's been no justice. So it felt like that was put on a global stage and a spotlight was being shone on it, which in and of itself is traumatic. So how then do you heal the country post that. And those who are wanting to come back and browbeat about what a successful engagement miss the fact that too many of us actually want to know, what are we going to do about crime? What are we going to do about violence? Because what hasn't changed is, what are we going to do about those who are unemployed? Tell us. Tell us, what are you going to do about the high levels of poverty? And ultimately, tell us even more so that those who want to leave our country and don't necessarily buy the state and want to claim to be refugees, how should we feel towards them? Because if we don't know how to feel towards them and leadership doesn't help us with that, what will eventually happen is that that anger will be misdirected. And when it's misdirected, it will be sent in the wrong way. I'm not sitting here saying that every white person is a racist or every white person thinks they're a refugee. That's not it. And neither should any white person think that every black person is criminal or violent or incompetent or whatever the stereotypes are. What we've got to do is work harder at saying, yeah, how do we heal this wound and some of this arrogance sometimes that comes through? How do we heal it? Because it's going to be important. And I think I said it at a speech after the president. I said, Mr. President, it's fine for you to say we should not be bullied. And others would argue the case. I wonder if we were bullied yesterday.
Yeah.
But let's not be bullied in the country, or let's build divisions when another murder takes place or another viral video of racist slants or whatever. Let's not find ourselves there. So to me, it wasn't leadership failure in the White House. It's been leadership failure domestically to be able to say, when all of these are going on, whose job is it to keep calling us to define this is what it means to be a South African? And I think maybe in some ways there's an exercise beckoning that says, whilst we may go on a charm offensive internationally, we should go on to our citizens and say to them, as part of a dialogue, here's what our goals are, here's what we're trying to do. You are a part of this country and you're a valuable contributor to this country. And then we can then begin to drive a collective agenda forward. And I think for me, this has been one of the more difficult things to note about the GNU, is that the GNU was then configured to elect a president. It wasn't configured around, it may claim it was a statement of intent, but it hasn't achieved that. It hasn't articulated. If you go to Kenya, Kenyans will tell you, we talk about Kenya 2030. If you went to Rwanda, they talk about where they want to go. You might underpin the democratic issues there. When you talk to China, they've got a long-term plan. You talk to India.
Absolutely.
So they're clear about what they want to do. So what is it for us?
I think that's a profound point, and one where we can segue back into South African politics and, the questions around the budget at which you're, at the center. Because I am coming to the view that this problem we have seen with the tabling of the budget since February to now, and thank goodness it seems that things are kind of moving in a positive direction, is not so much the VAT issue, which became symptomatic, but it's exactly what you said earlier, which is a budget is designed to fund policy priorities. And we don't have that. We don't have a policy agenda. And I keep saying this, and the months keep going on. And it feels like this government or this coalition's agenda is that we are not some other worse coalition that exists in people's minds. So in the absence, as you say, of the why or the concrete agenda that we are pushing this year and in 3 years and in 5 years, we will always have these skirmishes because we're almost making policy up as we go along.
There are some subtleties yesterday, right? That at least when the Minister of Finance tabled the budget, he says things like, if SARS collects more tax, then we'll take off the table our tax conversation for next year. I'm like, is that the future you are promising me? More tax? You know what I mean? It's a bit of a strange way of framing something.
If you're lucky as well.
Yeah, if you guys, otherwise anticipate more taxes coming in the medium term. And budget 1, 2, and 3 have all, in essence, focused on the tax conversation. what they haven't asked is there are almost a few numbers that you need to look at, and I certainly as a committee look at them. I look at, sure, GDP numbers. So I ask the question, are we demonstrating growth? Because if we're not growing, our debt to GDP ratio just keeps creeping up. And so the net effect is that you end up spending, I think it was 1.3 billion rands per day servicing debt. And so that just becomes a crowding out effect. The second number is, we've raised this, the gross capital formation, or what is the rate of investment in fixed infrastructure and other spaces. So I look at that number. I look at the primary balance number to see whether on non-interest bearing expenditure, are you spending within your means? So you look at that over the medium term. And the one positive is that at least in the medium term, those numbers start to look positive, which is a good thing.
Sure.
But it's a balancing act within a very tight fiscal space. So now the hard task that we've got to do is say to ourselves, given that there isn't an organizing vision, how do we make sure that the money that is appropriated is actually utilized to its fullest space? And if we really want, for example, of the police budget, I use that as a good example because policing and safety has been something we've been talking about. Almost 81% of it is spent on personnel. So in effect, the police and the state are just an agency. It's like an employment agency. We've hired a lot more people. Our detectives programs are low. Our funding of equipment, technology is low. Vehicles. You can go to a police station in certain places. They say the detective can't come to you because they don't have a car.
Sure, even infrastructure.
So when we talk about fighting crime, we must be conscious of that. When you look at the health budget, some of the difficulties around the health budget is that health is using this year's appropriation to pay for last year's debt. So if you go into certain other hospitals in the Eastern Cape within the financial year of October, November, sometimes you find out they run out of medicine. That is a proper disaster going forward. When you look at the education budget, is high on personnel because you've got to hire teachers, etc. But our ratio of teacher to pupil is 1 to 34 thereabouts, and in lower quintiles, so quintile 1, 2, and 3, that number sometimes goes up in certain communities. So then I've got to ask the question, so if there's 100 rands that get appropriated to a particular function, whether it be education, why is it that only 60 of those kids, for 100 pupils, only 60 of them get to write matric? What happened to the other 40? Because they're joining the ranks or they're unemployed. In healthcare, when you've got scrupulous acts like medical legal cases, or you end up with poor investment in the right things, such as stethoscope, equipment for doctors, etc. What happens there? And policing, and I can keep going. So for me, we've spoken about Operation Vulindlela as something that does structural reforms, keeping the lights on. And yet, even after keeping the lights on, last year we had the lowest number of days of load shedding, yet our GDP growth was 0.6%. So it tells you that yes, it's important to do that, but there are other aspects that you've got to do. Make sure your ports, your exports are working well, but also make sure you're skilling your people so they can participate. But the bigger issue is that, what do I ask people to do the things I want them to do, and what incentives am I going to give them to do that? So could we not give tax breaks to businesses that in fact employ more people? So if this year you hire more people, well, then I'm going to do something with your tax, reduce it. So it gives an incentive for the thing I want to see happen. And then also build resilient labor skills that make sure that, in fact, people are transitioning into the next economy. Because whilst our unemployment numbers, some of them are structural, historic, but some of them are just by mere effect of I would think twice about hiring a researcher. Because, frankly, there's AI technology that allows me to do that. So why would I hire someone within that capacity? I might hire someone to do something else. So which means that those researcher type jobs are fast disappearing. So we've got to think hard about what is the future world of work. When we use digital technology, how do we make sure people are working, living closer to home? And more crucially, when we respond to problems, this is my pain about South Africa. When we respond to problems, are we just adjusting for inflation year on year? Or are we in fact going, you know what, guys, here in Cape Town, the statistics of crime in Claremont, Constantia are less, so we're going to reduce resources there. and we're going to put them in Nyanga because the ratio of the number of police to citizens, certainly even after the Moerane report and many others, indicate that that is woefully low. So we're going to, rather than be pretty about historical budgeting mechanisms, we're actually going to be data-driven to say, the number one crime is happening here, resources are going there. These cars, it's fine to have I say, Skorokoro in Claremont or in Constantia because, you're not doing high-speed chases. But it's not okay when you're closer to the highway, you want your best vehicles there. So really rethink your crime response strategy rather than, and also say this one thing, we're going to target the top 200 criminals and we're going to put money towards that and take them apart. Because all over the world, we know that crime is done by the same people. They just repeat it because they get away with it. So target them. So it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say, using policing as just one example, is that the South African government doesn't always feel like it thinks about thinking and it thinks about how to respond and then solves its problems. I mean, load shedding will vote next year. I think load shedding is 18 years old, if I'm not mistaken. It will vote. So if you
will vote in a local government
election. It'll vote in local. And so if you have an 18-year-old problem, how can we take you seriously? Like, honestly, 18 years. Come on, guys.
Yeah, no, I want to put something to you because you will continue to be at the center of this budget question. There's some economists that I've had on the show who say that we need to rethink the whole budgeting question. And in actual fact, this idea that we have a shortfall is short-sighted, and we should rather invest a large amount into the economy through some kind of stimulus, which would take us in the short term to a higher level of debt maybe, but that investment will reap rewards further down the line. We have to fundamentally reset the economy through some kind of spending mechanism. What do you make of that perspective?
Yeah, it has to be led and done responsibly. You can't do it and just say, well, I'll keep the same players. I just am asking them to play a little bit differently and I'm going to throw resources at them.
The Zuma administration spent a lot.
Correct. You can end up making the problem worse. That school of thought is the anti-austerity school of thought. And it comes out of, in difficult times, spend, baby, spend.
Yeah.
So I hear the theory, except there are a couple of things that I would caveat those with. Is that we have a constitutional imperative that asks us to do certain things. And when you look at the top maybe 10 line items, learning and culture is number one, and that is protected by the Constitution. No one cannot take kids to school. No one cannot, The second one is debt servicing costs. The third is health. So no one cannot provide health care, etc., etc. So I would say about 60% of the budget is already committed to, just by reflecting on the constitutional imperatives. Otherwise, you fall foul of your own constitution. So what happens then to the balance of that in terms of that very question?
Yeah.
And I think you've got to think through that exercise by saying, okay, fair enough. If we're going to spend, the fundamentals are, if you're going to spend on infrastructure, if you're going to borrow, so if you're going to take your borrowing cost from capping at 77%, which is what it is this year, and you say you want to take them to 85 or whatever, because you're going to have to borrow to spend. Keep in mind that your borrowing costs are also crowding out other costs or other expense items. If you are going to do that, make sure you are borrowing. Like if we're a household, don't borrow for groceries, borrow for a house.
Infrastructure,
those
kind of items.
All of those types of things. And one of the key infrastructural questions is, where do we deal with our logistics network? But I've been thinking about this for a while, and go with me at this. And maybe I'd like the same economists to challenge the view, which is to say, when you look at the central parts of the country, rather than us saying, okay, let's also fix signaling in the old rail network, why don't we learn some things from Gautrain? So take Gautrain. Gautrain, when you build Gautrain and you introduce a number of stations, there's no denying the fact that it has the economic dividend that has happened in Midrand, because
Absolutely.
suddenly you've got economic activity mushrooming around stations. There's no denying that perhaps you could do the same in Centurion, and potentially you could do the same in Rhodesfield. Now, were you to think about the question differently and say, what is our man on the moon goal? Our man on the moon goal is to say, let me build a rail infrastructure that connects Limpopo, Free State, and the Northwest. So that triangle.
Sure.
It does a few things. I'm laying out massive infrastructure, which is a job enabler itself.
Yeah.
I'm telling investors, come, put your money here, and we'll give you concessions to run rail.
Yeah.
But here's the other benefit, is that if it were, for argument's sake, I could get a bullet train that would leave somewhere outside Gauteng in an hour to get to a space of work. Suddenly, I don't have to come and put a shack outside that. I could literally live anywhere else. And like anyone in London, I can live an hour away. But if I've got reliable rail, I can get onto it and get to places of work. So if I was able to, Malaysia did that successfully. If I was able to do that, then it decongests cities. It moves economic activity outwards, but it can also leverage the tourism aspects of those provinces. I don't know if you've ever traveled to Mpumalanga, but it's one of the most beautiful provinces. But few people go there because the roads are terrible. There's nothing else. The restaurants aren't, all of that. But whereas if I could say, I'm going to get a train that stops outside God's window, you can get off there. There are phenomenal restaurants. Here's what you're going to do. Suddenly it stimulates that sector of the economy. So all I'm saying is that give me the what's our man on the moon goal.
I fully agree.
And then you can fund for it. And then you can throw money at it. And then, yes, sure, our debt to GDP might be higher.
Yeah, but you know why.
But at least I'll have economic infrastructure with which I can use in the balance sheet of the country.
I fully agree. And I think that's what we lack. We lack something to excite us and inspire us. And the plan seems to be just keep the lights on, hopefully, and keep everything ticking over by inflation. And there's no central coordination, one big project that the country can get behind.
And the World Cup teaches us some of that, right? Like if you think about 2010, all of us were like, they're inconveniencing us, they're building roads, but wow, we could see the growth, the thing was happening, and we're building stadia, building roads, doing that. Where's the corruption? Yes, there was collusion and all of that, but all of us were like so towards the goal. And funny enough, when you track murder rates prior to the World Cup, because of over-investment into policing, our murder rate was declining. Because we prioritized it and we funded for it. So, to me, yes, economics that say spend are not bad in and of themselves because they depart you from saying you're just tabling pro-poor budgets. They put you in an investment mindset. But make sure you've got the capability to do that. Otherwise, I could take money and put it in a municipality that's useless and lose it.
Bit of a more difficult question. The fiscal framework. That was, well, let me be clear. Let me be a bit clear here. The court ultimately settled. But it seems to me that if you read some of those court papers, the fiscal framework that was put through Parliament had some procedural problems with it. Do you regret supporting that fiscal framework, given that it was procedurally flawed?
No, I think, again, let me start the question, not narrowly, but broadly. What is a fiscal framework? A fiscal framework isn't, the question that was put in Parliament wasn't, do you want VAT or not? And the answer is no, right? Like so that's an easy one. The question was, do you want at do you want a fiscal framework to which some of it has growth projections, issues about where we're going to spend certain priorities, etc.? Is that what you want? And as a caveat towards it, the next 30 days mean that we will spend time adjusting for the VAT component.
Which did ultimately happen.
Correct. So responsible leadership says, that's that. Then we've got to do that. But the other question that we've also got to keep in mind is, frankly, I think, that is an important thing, but wasn't the only important thing. Because the conversation we're no longer having, because we looked at that fiscal framework only through the VAT eyes, was, is there thinking enough about capital formation? Is there thinking enough about other expenditure? And that's a conversation we need to have as a country. But we're not, because it became at the time a binary question whether you're pro-VAT or not. And maybe others would say that's politics. But I'm saying, while you are politicking, the next exercise you've got to do is to say, actually, do I want to fund provinces? Because there's a division of revenue bill that must follow the language. Do I want to fund appropriations? So in national departments, what am I doing in municipalities? What is this fiscal framework as it speaks to debt, growth projections? What does it mean for me? So we had to vote with that in mind. Because let me tell you what the reality of today is. In February, when you hit the start gun, you could pass the budget in July. And you had ample time to amend and do all of that.
Sure.
That didn't get tabled. We moved to March, which means the start gun hit, but your time is less. Now we're tabling a budget in May. The finishing line is still July. Your time is much less, which means you've really robbed Parliament through court processes and all sorts of that. You've robbed Parliament its ability to actually step back to the minister and say, here's where we amend and here's what we are doing. Let me paint a different scenario. What if we'd agreed on a fiscal framework? It came to the Appropriations Committee or the whatever, and Parliament said, actually, we reject the VAT hike. We reject the following things. Can you amend here, here, here? And then Treasury and the Ministry came back and said, Bill 2, which is what the Money Bills and Related Matters Act says, you can amend the budget. Once that's amended, wouldn't that have been a win for the people of the country? But instead, we've reduced it to politics. And the net effect of it is that we've lost an ability to exercise the full might of Parliament. And why Parliament needs to exercise its full might is because when it makes policy choices, then people don't say it's party X or party Y. They say Parliament decided this.
Sure.
So hindsight is always 2020. There was some hard. I'll be honest with you. The VAT issue was one of the toughest ones I've ever been through because.
I'm sure. It was unprecedented.
Man, I saw how vitriolic some people can be on Twitter. I mean, I was issuing a message of condolence to the Pope, and I felt like people were like, would the Pope have voted for VAT? You know what I mean? It was wild. It became personal.
You celebrated Liverpool and like Mo Salah wouldn't have voted for the...
You know what I mean? I'd go home to my mother, be like, and then she'd be like, the cost of bread is going up. So I accept it, and it was hard. But I'm glad that democracy taught us this important lesson, that no one is an outright majority and things can change. And I think the political process, despite all the ones who claimed the court victory, I thought the political process was important because what it did do is it forced people in the room for us to own responsibility, but also be able to go, this is right, this is wrong. And we represent the people.
Last question.
Yeah.
You chair probably the most important committee because the Appropriations Committee, as I understand it, decides on a national level where the money actually goes in the end. We've got a framework, we've got a budget, but it has to go through your committee.
Yeah.
Where to next, and what kind of work is the committee going to be doing to make sure that those rands and cents are appropriated appropriately?
Well, so the steps are the fiscal framework will serve in now 14 days from now. And then that committee will then hand over effectively a number of documents. The first one is the Division of Revenue Bill, which is a vertical allocation. So provinces municipalities, etc. So we'll have a look at that and we'll hold public consultations on that. And then people will give us inputs. And then we'll look at it really properly. The second one is then the appropriation bill, which gets voted for last because that deals with all the individual votes, vote 1 to vote 41. So that work has got to be done. I want to say this here, and it's hard work to say because I think, given the start line, I think the work this year is pretty much done, to be honest with you. I think the budget will pass because the Money Bills and Related Matters Act says if I want to change education, change the funding for education, I need 10 days. to do that because I've got to inform the Minister of Finance. He has 48 hours to respond. He has to inform the Minister of Education. That adjustment has to come back, and then eventually 10 days later, that work is done. I just don't have those 10 days.
You just don't have, and this is the problem of the delay.
Of the delays. So what I'd like to do is to obsess, because the minister talks about the medium-term framework, which is over 3 years, is obsessed about that inner year. So what's going to happen in that inner year and what's going to happen in that outer year. Because that outer year is an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing opportunity in that for those who want to say, let's budget differently, let's do things, we really can think about that outer year. I mean, here's one consideration that's of interest.
Yeah.
For example, in that outer year, when you look at population growth of South Africa, you can immediately see that actually the population is aging and fewer children are coming through. So if you were to think about it that way, would you then say, actually, I'm going to think about the child grant differently, but I might add a little bit more resource in the old age grant because it's coming through. So suddenly you're starting to have a budgetary conversation that goes into that. You look at the outer year, what all of those things. So that's one piece of work that we're doing, but the most important piece of work that we are going to be doing is the famous spending reviews, which is in partnership with Treasury and the Presidency to say, is money are you getting bang for buck?
That's such an important
ultimate
piece.
thing. So we're going to be spending quite a significant amount of time doing that. And then I'm hoping that when the minister mentioned some of the items you have to fund in the second half of the year, one of them is about this national dialogue thing. I'm hoping that once that gets funded, we can be able to sit in a room and actually say, what does South Africa want? How does it want to go about it? What are some of the things? What are the choices we've got to make? I think, I even think about this. This is me being populist, maybe. But it's not being populist, actually. I actually think this thing about deputy ministers, right? Can't I give them the title but don't have to give them the money? Honestly,
you can call yourself a deputy minister.
You be deputy minister of anything.
Exactly. Actually, let's call them the president as well at the same time.
While we're at it, but we don't have to give them the driver, the budget, all of that. We don't have to do that.
We have to do something about the national executive.
You know what I mean?
We simply must.
We have to do something about seaters.
Yeah.
We have a national skills levy, but the majority of people who are unemployed have zero skills. They are unemployable. Yes, sure, the economy needs to grow to create more jobs, but even if there were jobs, there are certain people who are unemployable because they've got no skills. I'm not going to hire somebody who, with respect, can't do basic numeracy, literacy, all of the above. So it's a failure of education. And so we have an intrinsic value of education. What is its extrinsic value? And we haven't solved for that. But we have a national skills levy. And we've got all sorts of things like that. So, we're introducing a fuel levy starting up next month. But can we review to say, let's make sure at least we also obsess hard about how do we strengthen our currency so that the purchasing of oil, which is a huge component of fuel, begins to bring fuel prices down. Because once fuel prices start to go up, inflation goes up and so is the cost of goods. So all I'm asking us to do is to say, let us plan for our future, think hard about what we're trying to do, make the tough decisions and say, you know what? We can't have deputy ministers. We just can't. Or you are deputy minister, but you are also just an ordinary citizen. The thing about South Africa is the lack of ambition.
Absolutely.
We just are living in a country where, like to your point, it feels like we're just tinkering.
Yeah. And tinkering
it's time
is
for brevity and courage to say, it's going to be rough, people. But frankly, growing at 1% isn't good enough for us. And I'm hearing a lot of young people celebrating people like Traore and many others like that in Africa. So it is possible to have a leadership that eventually says, letting go of yesterday, I think hard about what tomorrow must hold so that I can make the choices about tomorrow. Then I'd love to be a part of that conversation rather than just, let's talk about wasted years. I feel like we are wasting the years as we are talking about wasted years.
Mmusi Maimane, you're a national treasure, sir.
No!
Thank you for joining us. Like, share, subscribe. Make sure you keep it locked on SMWX. Help us to reach that next milestone of 250,000 subscribers. And see you on the next one. Aye.
Fam, discount alert. Big shout out to our partners who made these Cape Town episodes possible. First, Curiosity Cape Town. They gave us a stylish and comfortable space to stay and shoot. Use the promo code SMWX for 10% off your next stay. Next up, Pace Car Rental. They kept us moving with ease through the city. Use that same promo code SMWX to get 10% off your next car rental with them. Support those who support the channel, and let's go.